All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into an idea so powerful, it literally shattered empires and built new nations right from their ashes. Yep, we're talking about nationalism and how it completely redrew the map of Europe.
So our story kicks off with this, just an incredible image from 1848. It's a French artist's dream of a perfect world. And if you look closely, you can see people from all these different nations marching along together. They're not paying homage to a king, no, they're honoring the very idea of liberty. It's this really powerful vision of unity, of brotherhood.
But here's the big question, right? How did this beautiful, beautiful dream of unity somehow become a cause of world war? How does an idea about brotherhood turn into a force for brutal conflict? Okay, let's get into it.
You see, Soryu's print, it wasn't just a pretty picture. It was basically a snapshot of this radical new idea that was taking hold all across Europe. For the very first time, people were starting to imagine the world not just as a random collection of kingdoms, but as a family of nations.
And this way of thinking led to a brand new concept, the nation-state. Now, before this, you got to remember, Europe was just this patchwork of huge multinational empires. You weren't a citizen of Austria. You were a subject of the Habsburg Emperor. You could have Germans, Hungarians, Italians, all living under one crown, but with very little in common. The nation-state, well, it changed everything. It was this radical idea that a state should belong to its people.
So, where did this wild idea of the nation even come from? Well, it wasn't some slow, gradual evolution. Nope, it was an explosion. A revolution that absolutely changed the game.
We're talking about the French Revolution of 1789. This was a massive turning point. It basically declared that the right to rule, well, it no longer came from God or was handed down to a king. It came from the people, the citizens of France. And just like that, the modern nation was born.
And the revolutionaries, they didn't just talk a big game, they actually took real concrete steps to forge this new collective identity. They introduced ideas like la patrie, the fatherland, and les citoyens, the citizen, to really make people feel like they were part of one big, united community. They ditched the old royal flag for the tricolor we all know today and created a national assembly that was actually elected by the people. They even standardized laws and measurements across the country to tie the nation together.
Then, of course, Napoleon enters the scene. As his armies marched across Europe, they basically carried these revolutionary ideas with them. He brought in his Napoleonic Code, which was huge. It established equality before the law. He got rid of the old feudal system. But this was a classic double-edged sword. Because along with all these modern reforms came things like heavy taxes, really strict censorship, and, oh yeah, being forced to join his army. So people might have gained some administrative efficiency, but they sure lost their political freedom in the process.
So you have this new, explosive idea of the nation, and it's on a direct collision course with the old order of Europe. And believe me, that collision would set the stage for an entire century of conflict.
Okay, so after Napoleon was finally defeated in 1815, this huge struggle kicked off. You can think of it as a century-long tug-of-war between the new forces of revolution and the old guard, who were desperately trying to turn back the clock.
On one side, you had the liberal nationalists. These guys were totally inspired by the French Revolution. They were demanding constitutions, freedom of the press, and government by the consent of the people. And on the other side, you had the conservatives, led by powerful figures like the Austrian Chancellor Metternich. Their whole goal was to restore the old monarchies and keep the traditional social order exactly as it was.
This ideological war created some legendary revolutionaries, like Italy's Giuseppe Mazzini. This guy founded secret societies like Young Italy, specifically to fight for a unified, democratic Italian republic. And to a conservative like Metternich, Mazzini was basically public enemy number one. He called him, and I quote, the most dangerous enemy of our social order. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know.
This whole struggle just boiled over and exploded in 1848, a year they called the Spring of Nations. It was chaos all across the continent. You had Germans and Italians demanding their own unified nations, Poles and Hungarians rising up against their imperial rulers. Workers were protesting absolutely horrible economic conditions, and the liberal middle classes, they tried to set up constitutional governments, like the famous Frankfurt Parliament's attempt to write a constitution for a united Germany. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The old orders struck back hard, and these revolutions were crushed by monarchical armies.
Okay, this next part is a really crucial turning point. The dream of a nation built by the people, well, it had failed. But the idea of nationalism itself, oh, it was far from dead. In fact, it was about to be co-opted, taken over by the very same conservatives who had just fought so hard against it.
The new thinking went something like this. If the people can't build nations through revolution from the bottom up, then the monarchs will build them through war and diplomacy from the top down. See the shift? Nationalism was no longer a tool for liberation, it became a tool for building state power and making the monarchy even stronger.
And the ultimate example of this? Look no further than the unification of Germany. The man behind it all was Prussia's chief minister, Otto von Bismarck. He famously declared that the big questions of the day wouldn't be decided by speeches and votes. That, he said, was the mistake of 1848, but by iron and blood. And he meant it. He used the incredibly powerful Prussian army to fight and win 3 decisive wars. And by 1871, Germany was unified under the Prussian king, not under a parliament.
A similar, though maybe a little more complex, top-down process happened in Italy, too. It was this mix of the super-savvy diplomacy of Chief Minister Cavour on one hand and the military victories of the popular General Garibaldi on the other. But here, too, the end result was a nation unified under a king, a nation built for the people, but not necessarily by them.
And this brings us to the final and kind of tragic transformation of nationalism in the 19th century. That original dream of unity, yeah, it was about to turn into a nightmare of division and conflict. By the end of the century, that optimistic, liberal, democratic spirit of 1848 was just gone. Nationalism had become something else entirely. It was aggressive, intolerant, and fiercely competitive. It wasn't about creating a brotherhood of nations anymore. It was about proving your nation was superior to all the others, usually through military power.
And nowhere was this more dangerous than in the Balkans. As the old Ottoman Empire started to weaken, all these different Slavic groups began fighting for their independence. But the problem was, these new nations almost immediately became intensely jealous rivals. And to make everything 1,000 times worse, the great powers of Europe, Russia, Germany, Austria-Hungary, they all started meddling in the region, using these nationalist tensions to push their own imperial goals. The whole area became a literal powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
So you have this toxic combination of aggressive nationalism and imperial ambition. It was a ticking time bomb. It created this tangled web of rivalries and alliances that was so tense, any little spark could set off a massive continental explosion. And that spark finally came in 1914, plunging all of Europe into the catastrophe of the First World War.
So, when you step back and look at it, you see the full journey of this idea. From Suryo's dream of liberty and brotherhood, to a tool for building powerful states, and finally, to a justification for total war. It's just a powerful and kind of sobering reminder of how a single idea can shape our world, for better or for worse. A legacy that, honestly, we are still grappling with today.